In the old High German heroic lay, the song of Hildenbrandslide, there's a battle between a father and a son, and quite tragically, the son doesn't recall his father, believing him to be dead. Yet, the father recognizes him, and thus both end up physically clashing. Sadly, due to the troubled nature of medieval manuscripts, we don't know how the story ends. The poem breaks off mid-line. Much of the scholarship and commentary on medieval German literature focuses on mythological influence, historical references, and church patronage. Yet, look closer at these stories. There's another interesting part of this poem, and that's the theme of family, as well as the discord between different generations and father and son. The concept of a family, so broken and strained by forces outside of their control, to the point where a son cannot see the love of his father and the previous heroic generations of Germany. I can certainly imagine 21st century populists in Europe and the Anglosphere appreciating the heartache in Old and Middle High German literature, but also in the wider sphere of Anglo-Saxon and Norse mythology. To myself, these poems and heroic accounts can help us understand populism better. In this video, I will interrogate these Germanic myths and depict their connection with populism. My focus comes primarily from Germany and the United Kingdom, but this video can also apply for France, Italy, and the United States. Also, when I use the term populism, I am referring to mostly right-wing populism, but perhaps this video will assist other political categories. I'm also not interested in creating moral judgments on right-wing populism, either positive or negative, as that detracts from the superior goal of understanding and making connections between the past and the present. I hope this video appeals to a variety of political beliefs, as my goal is to create discussion and to help others see situations in a new light. I am Madeleine Rose Jones, and I help you understand the world through fiction. Subscribe for frequent videos about history, literature, and culture. Welcome to Snowy Fictions. Part 1. The Nature of Populism. The emergence of populism, especially in Europe and North America, has engaged and encouraged sensational and often emotional headlines about threats to democracy. From this, we can tell there is something evocative about populism, and I believe this stems from why people are drawn to populism in the first place. Political scientist and professor Matthew Goodwin has highlighted the crucial elements underpinning contemporary populism. This includes the distrust populists feel towards the status quo and towards established figures and institutions. The populists overall feel a great sense of failure by people who manage and run their society. The second motivation, and quite interestingly, is destruction. The populists do not see themselves as destructive, but are keen in their criticism of globalism, neoliberalism, and at times American hegemony. This has resulted in the third motivation, deprivation. Populists often point out to rising crime, a declining living standards, and employment opportunities as rationales for their beliefs. Among right-wing populists, there is also an emphasis on communal identity and the cohesion of a national identity. And finally, we reach the concept of de-alignment, where populists assign themselves to certain parties, such as National Rally in France, current strands of the GOP in the USA, and of course Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. Here we must distinguish between populists and neoconservative thought, which I associate the latter more with figures like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, whose approach to culture, foreign policy, economics, and nationhood is completely different, and often in opposition to right-wing populists. There is a huge tension within the right between populists and mainstream figures. This was shown quite obviously in the rise of Donald Trump, who took his predecessors to task on illegal immigration and warmongering. From this, we can understand the somewhat revolutionary nature of populism. It is not necessarily a call to simplistic nostalgia, but more of a return to greatness, where citizens had a purpose and genuinely thrived in their communities. This reading of Western history will provoke both nods and disagreements. However, I cannot underestimate the alienation and the disconnect present within populists and the era they are in. The mythology and folklore speaks to this. In the 19th century, in the face of the Industrial Revolution and modernizing reforms, groups of artists, such as the Nazarenes in Germany, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in England, took inspiration from the Middle Ages and certain biblical scenes, all to communicate a certain worldview, political philosophy, and emotional state. So often, I encounter articles by academics in pre-modern history who criticize populists for mischaracterizing the myths of Norse and Greece. There are also attempts to decolonize and rewrite these stories, but ultimately this misses the point. The appeal of mythology and folklore to contemporary audiences says as much about modernity than the pre-modern societies. Instead of nitpicking about historical accuracy or the flaws of heroism, we must ask ourselves, why are populists, especially on the right, attracted to this mythology and folklore? What do these stories provide that our current era fails to do so? That is the purpose of this video. Part 2. The Hero's Journey. No discussion about mythology is complete without a reference to the hero's journey. Popularized by mythological and religious scholar Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey is also in dialogue with the archetypes developed from Carl Jung. In it, our hero ventures outside of home, where he must face dangers in order to save himself, his people, and therefore his home. There is usually a supernatural or magical presence, a mental figure, perhaps a love interest, and an overarching villain. A well-known example is of course the hero's journey in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, an expert on Germanic language and myth. Frodo Baggins must leave the comfort of the Shire and later Rivendell to venture to Mordor and destroy the One Ring. He is assisted with Sam, where both reminisce occasionally about the Shire. Therefore, the hero will always draw on their home for strength and courage. Likewise, the medieval romance Parsifal, written in Middle High German, features adventure, marriage, knights, chivalric values, the Holy Grail, and courageous heroes. Yet, populism is different. For one, populists tend to see their tasks as written within their home, which is currently changing due to forces outside their control. Whereas the hero in this journey takes control of his agency and is a catalyst for change, the populist feels weakened and suffers from a notion of powerlessness. Therefore, the young right-wing populist is more in tune with someone like Michel Houellebecq than Tolkien. There is no grand quest, no love awaiting, no making things right through magic. Everyone in the 21st century is denied heroism. One criticism that I find very interesting populists have of contemporary societies is the lack of purpose. The political party, Alternative for Deutschland, have argued even for compulsory military service with the aim of social cohesion and to decrease alienation. We can use Germanic mythology and literature to understand populist ideals. Germanic literature and myth too, however, reflect the populist terror of losing home. The Old English poem, The Wanderer, depicts the ruin and carnage one home has decayed into. England in the early Middle Ages underwent numerous invasions and conquests, from the Saxons and the Vikings in particular. In AD 793, the Vikings raided Lindisfarne, slaughtering and burning much of the monastery and island, including the population, which included monks. Although contemporary populists live in a very different time to the early Middle Ages, we can understand the real fears of invasion, losing heritage, and communities suffering. The only way to avoid this is through embracing our roles as heroes and protectors. Part 3. Mythic Kings. The king figure is a crucial aspect of Germanic literature and mythology. This is certainly true in Old Norse sagas, where Viking kings such as Ragnar Lothbrok, Knut the Great, and Eric the Red are depicted as deeply intertwined with their communities and ambitions. And what ambitions they were! These men conquered, fulfilling their dreams and imaginations. Yet, populists live in an era without kings. We may have presidents, chancellors, or prime ministers, yet there is a distribution of power among multiple groups and individuals. Authority, therefore, is decentralized. The mythic Germanic king cannot exist in the contemporary age, as the structures of liberalism do not allow it. Even when a populist leader appears, such as Giorgia Meloni in Italy or Viktor Orban in Hungary, many position in the West these leaders as threats to democracy. This is because populist leaders seek a centralization of power away from the assortment of politicians, corporations, public servants, and international agreements. We can only look to Great Britain, a heavily Germanic country in terms of language, history, and culture, to see this dynamic. The journalist Poppy Corbin calls this the blob, and has been used by various young populist activists. It's this interpretation that Britain is ultimately run by the civil service, the legacy of previous prime ministers such as Tony Blair, the European Commission of Human Rights, and more. Whatever initiatives or choices the Mythic King or the British people make will be drowned out by these systems. Germanic mythology and literature appeal to those disgruntled by this. The king, ever the warrior, poet, philosopher, and father, is a fundamentally inspirational figure. The TV show Vikings illuminated this very, very well with Ragnar. He is a truly captivating character who encourages his men and women to see more and therefore become more. Hence, we see the fundamental appeal of the Mythic King. Everyone in this civilization has a purpose, a quest for greater meaning, and the capacity to feel a heroic narrative. Sadly, this is not possible in the current era, and therefore the populists oppose the current distribution of power. This belief, as I'd argue, is not an assault on democracy. Rather, it's a re-evaluation on the uses of power. Not all populists are necessarily monarchists, and many who are still value a constitution or parliament. Part 4. Family and tradition. Family is critical in both populist thought and in Germanic mythology. In the traditional sense, family refers to a mother and a father and at least one child who are bound physically together for many years, typically living in a home. There are many approaches to family within populist politics, such as concerns relating to homosexuality, adoption, education, parental right, and the liberties of children. This section, however, doesn't talk about any of that. Rather, I'm interested in what the familial structure tells us about populist politics. While growing up, your mother and father teach you about communicating with others, expected behaviour, standards, and values. This is hopefully done through love and protection. We can understand families as offering structure, support, and love to children when they are at their most vulnerable. This concept can also apply to a wider civilization, where rulers take on a protective role. However, even within such a dynamic, every family member or countryman has a distinct purpose and can contribute to a greater cause. An example in medieval English literature comes from Arthurian legend with Arthur's court, which frequently involves knights of the Round Table. This combines multiple archetypes, scholars such as Merlin, knights and warriors, ladies-in-waiting, adventurers, priests, students, and healers. This variety signifies a kinship among different generations, personalities, and talents, all united under the same cause or banner. This romantic view of family and country is mirrored in German Romanticism, the intellectual era spanning the end of the 18th century to the middle of the 19th. In it, philosophers, writers, and activists drew on nature, Germanic literature, music, medieval history, opera, and politics to imagine unity with each other and to themselves. The ever-magnificent landscape of the Rhine enforces this, as does the Alps, the Hertz Mountains, the imposing Cologne Cathedral, the wonderful old towns, and spellbinding art scenes. I could make a whole video series about the richness present in German art, but for now I want to portray Germanic populism as ultimately a unifying force, not in the typical contemporary understanding of diversity. Rather, Germanic populism is a force that brings countrymen closer with nature, history, and purpose. Part 5. All of this brings us to a vital point about populism, the idea of home. From this, we can also understand a crucial difference between left-wing and right-wing populism. The latter sees home as in decay, where the days of glory have ended. This is why Donald Trump says we need to make America great again. The concept of returning to a superior, better era is crucial to right-wing populism. I also see this in the United Kingdom too. There is a reason why Nigel Farage is deeply defensive of British history and customs, because to him, and to many Brits, an assault on history and tradition is an attack on the home. This is mirrored in Germanic mythology and literature in a unique way. Unlike the populist, who often stays at home, the hero undergoes a journey throughout different lands and environments. While often in the case of children's literature, such as Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia, the fantasy land is more home-like than the actual home. Narnia's magic increases when one considers the catastrophe of the Blitz, which saw the ruin and decay of many British cities. Other Germanic literature takes on a spiritual bent, with the afterlife representing a home. This is surely the case for the Norse sagas. In the climax of Eagle's saga, the warriors find their bones among churchyards. Curiously, we see a blend of pagan and Christian views on the afterlife, with Valhalla and heaven representing the climax of the story. This signifies that although the populace is limited to a certain land, this place, whether Scandinavia, Germany, or England, is connected with heaven and the broader cosmology of the earth. In many ways, Germanic mythology and literature serves a specific purpose for the populist. Although these stories tell of vast complex lands and adventures with dragons, magic and war, they serve as reminders of the magic already existing within our own civilization. Returning to Narnia, C.S. Lewis was clearly in dialogue with English fairy tales and folklore, while also attuned to theological debates in the Anglican Church. Of course, the most memorable example is Tolkien, who used the Swiss and English landscapes in particular to create Middle-earth. Because of this, Germanic mythology and folklore urge the populist to recover the magic in their civilization before it dies out. Folklore and literature is ultimately a tool to illuminate a better, more accomplished society. These stories of heroism, chivalry, and adventure also provide meaning to a civilization, as the current citizens can claim lineage to these fables, even if these stories are completely fictional. From this, we can discern the dynamic between Germanic mythology and literature with populism. These stories, whether medieval or modern, are a way for contemporary populists to explore their experiences, their history and desires. It's truly remarkable how an epic written in Middle High German can tell us about contemporary political movements. Regardless of your opinions on populism, there is no denying their connection with the past and the roots of their civilization. Thank you for watching, and if you have any feedback, please leave a comment. If you'd like, share this video on social media or via email. I plan to make more videos about history, literature and culture, so perhaps you'd like to subscribe. I also have classes on creative writing, with the recent one being on productivity and time management. Please check them out. Regardless, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.